session is based on the theme Return and Rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits. The sub-themes would be the impact of ethnic cleansing of Kashmiri Pandits in composite culture, policy framework, safety and security of return, and confidence-building measures and the way forward. The honorable key speakers for this session would be Lieutenant General Gurmeet Singh, PVSM, UISM, AVSM, VSM, former Deputy Chief of Army Staff, Indian Army. He is also a distinguished fellow at Center for Land Warfare Studies. We next have on the panel is Dr. S.P. Ved, IPS retired officer, former Director General of Police. Sir is also a DGP of Jammu and Kashmir from 31st December till 6th September 2018 and has made notable contributions in J&K. Next up, we have Mr. Alok Bansal. Sir is a director at India Foundation. He was appointed as Executive Director at South Asian Institute for Strategic Affairs and of Director of Center for Security and Strategy, Indian Foundation. We next have Mr. Sushil Pandit, political analyst and owner of Hive Communications India Private Limited. We next have Ms. Madhu Kishwar, founder of Manushi and national professor at Indian Council of Social Research Center. And we next have Dr. Ramesh Raina. Sir is a member of Kashmir Sevak Samaj and former General Secretary, All India Kashmir Samaj. This session will be moderated by Ms. Padmaja Joshi. Ma'am is a consulting editor at Politics Department, Times Now. So the session will be till 11:30, and I would now request the moderator, Ms. Padmaja Joshi, to please take over. Thank you.
Thanks for the introduction. I think also I would like to thank the moderator of the previous session, because Lakshmi, you set up perfectly what we are going to discuss right now. And without further ado, I want to pick up on the thread of the previous conversation. The return and rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits. Why is it that over 3 decades later, and I will start with you, Mr. Bansal, because you were smiling in the closing comments of the last session. Why is it that after 3 decades, we are still having this discussion? Why hasn't it already happened?
Thank you, Padmajaji. I think the topic that has been given as far as Kashmiri Pandits, their return and rehabilitation is concerned, and the question she asked is why it has not happened. Now, firstly, I think we heard the first session, we heard the heart-wrenching tales which were told by Sushmaji and others of how Kashmiri Pandits were forced to leave. Why it has not happened, I think the genesis lies in those heart-wrenching tales. The people who left and circumstances under which they left, I think they are extremely reluctant to go back. We need to understand that a lot of people talked that the causes were religious, causes were this. I do not wish to get into that. But the solution is definitely not religious. The solution requires an integrated society. And we need to understand that Kashmiri Pandits were the cream of the Kashmiri society. When we talk of Kashmiri culture, when we talk of Kashmiri literature, the contribution of the Kashmiri Pandits has been enormous. They were actually the ones who actually gave fragrance to the Kashmiri society. And I think any enlightened Muslim, as far as Kashmir is concerned, realizes this, that the Kashmiri society without Kashmiri Pandits is actually, there is a vacuum. There is actually a thing. Now, having gone through that, now we need to understand many of the Kashmiri Pandits who have migrated, and I have been meeting them not only in India, I have gone and met them abroad. I went to Atlanta, I went to California, I met a large number of them. But you'll be surprised that many of them have never ever gone back to Kashmir. Even in India, I met Kashmiri Pandits. Once they left, they have never ever gone back. Now, when I tell them that, yes, I have gone there so many times, you can move around in Kashmir Valley without anything, they are still not ready to accept. But again, going and visiting Kashmir is different. Living Kashmir is different. As somebody said, that if you have to go and live there, what is the sense of security? They suffer from a sense of insecurity. And that sense of insecurity has to be done away with. And that sense of insecurity stems from the fact, excuse me, that sense of insecurity stems from the fact that the circumstances under which they had to live were extremely difficult, which actually led to them they carry memories which prevent them from going back. Some people believe that there is no sense of urgency. Why are we in such an urgent situation? We need to create an atmosphere when these Kashmiri Pandits feel comfortable going back. But there is a sense of urgency, and that we need to understand. The sense of urgency stems from the fact that the next generation of Kashmiri Pandits, which is growing up outside Kashmir, really does not have that sort of love lost for Kashmir as the previous generation. Consequently, if this generation does not go back, the next generation is going to be extremely reluctant to go back. So it's very essential that we do something whereby Kashmiri Pandits get back before the generation which had migrated actually leaves the planet. And that is where a sense of urgency is there. It's not that nobody has gone that. Government has tried to institute a lot of measures. There are certain jobs which have been provided. But what happens is that there are isolated Kashmiri Pandits, as was said in the previous session, that most Kashmiri Pandits were a minuscule minority fragmented all over Kashmir. They had most of the land. Most of the land belonged to them. They were at the upper strata of the society. They controlled everything. Now going back where one or two families live in a village, isolated from others, it creates a sense of insecurity. And there is, of course, a huge problem. A lot of people are not willing to go and live in different townships. They probably want, as they said, they want separate townships to be created where they are a majority. Is that feasible? To my mind, that's a little difficult at this juncture. What is required today in Jammu and Kashmir for rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits is, first requirement is creation of new urban conglomerates. The Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir desperately needs new urban conglomerates. Today, both Jammu and Srinagar are bursting at the seams. Everything, every institution is being located either in Jammu or in Srinagar. And these cities are actually urban nightmares now. In fact, traffic jams in cities like Jammu and Srinagar are a frequent phenomena. We are shifting capitals from Jammu to Srinagar and Srinagar to Jammu every year, spending 100 crore rupees per annum. Now, could we create new urban conglomerates? There is a need for a city, new city to come up, a Canberra model between Jammu and Srinagar, where a new capital of Jammu and Kashmir needs to be created. Similarly, in the Mughal Road, there is a need for setting up a new urban conglomerate. So that we need to create 2-3 big towns, new towns, which needs to be established in Jammu and Kashmir. And
I want this to be a free-flowing conversation between different people. There are a lot of people who perhaps seem to be suggesting, responding to what you're saying, that you're looking at it purely from a logistical point of view about whether there should be different urban clusters, whether people should stay separately or be integrated. But the alienation is not just physical. There is an emotional alienation, and that is why the confidence is not there for Pandits to return to the valley even now. How do you bridge that?
No, that's what I was trying to say, that this has to be a two-stage solution. The first solution is that they move into valley where they live in a place where they are surrounded by their own people. And that's where I was talking of new urban conglomerates where they could stay. And once, after spending a certain period of time, when they have a certain level of confidence, because even though the few Kashmiri Pandits who have gone back, their neighbors are welcome. Of course, there are apprehensions which will always remain, because there are a certain section of society which has benefited from the migration of Kashmiri Pandits. Their properties have been usurped, their homes have been taken up. So they are actually benefiting. But once they go and stay inside Kashmir Valley, probably they'll get a feel that it is not the majority which is against them. Probably the people who had been instrumental in their being pushed out have also suffered. And now a new government dispensation. Today, the presence of security forces in Valley is much higher than it was when they were pushed out.
A lot of people seem to be reacting to what you're saying. Let me bring in Madhu Kishwar first. Why are you shaking your head, Madhu Kishwar? I think your mic is muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go on.
Shailaja, I'm really, really pained by this victim blaming. To say that this generation, the new generation, doesn't want to go back, and they don't realize how welcoming the majority of Kashmiri Muslims would be of their return. That's simply not true. Firstly, it is not clear the government of India is actually serious about ensuring the return of Pandits to the valley, because that requires very determined attempts to change the demography of J&K. The demography of J&K has been systematically changed. There's been, apart from the fact, the history of forced conversions, which resulted in Kashmiri Hindus becoming a minuscule minority. We don't even dare teach that history in mainland India, leave alone in Kashmir. We don't dare acknowledge under what brutal conditions Kashmir, the J&K became Muslim majority. We don't dare acknowledge that there's been ongoing demographic invasion using the Constitution of India, using legal means such as Roshni Act to actually also make Jammu a Muslim majority region. And many districts in that region have already witnessed similar ethnic cleansing of Hindus. It's ongoing. We also know as recently as January 1, when Satpal Nischal was murdered simply because he got a domicile certificate. He had lived there for 50 years, done business there for 50 years, simply because now he could buy a small piece of property and call it home. He was murdered. Not one voice from among the Kashmiri spectrum spoke. Neither the mainstream parties nor anybody protested. Sadly, even BJP and RSS didn't. Sadly, in the rest of the country also, there was no response, no rejoinder to that. Now, even with regard to domicile certificate, I can speak even from the experience of my own family. One of my uncles who had domicile certificate, apart from the fact that my grandfather was a had status, domicile status, but one of my uncles who was driven out in 1991, and his wife is a Kashmiri Pandit. Their family is in Mumbai. They're petrified of going back. Not that they don't want to. In fact, last night I received a message from this cousin of mine saying, I want to, but I don't even know how to. There hasn't been a concerted move by the government of India to enable Kashmiri Hindus. We shouldn't be using the term Kashmiri Pandits because that in itself reduces the impact of what happened. Now, Kashmiri Hindus have been scattered all over the country, and also some have had to migrate abroad. There's no concerted move to tell them how to become state subjects, how to get that domicile certificate. And when a Satpal Nischal is murdered, within days of his getting a domicile certificate, you can well imagine the terror that people are actually experiencing at the thought. Now, people, just now, Mr. Bansal also talked about jobs have been created. Believe you me, I went to these settlements where a few Kashmiri Hindus had been created these, small enclaves, small hutments made with temporary material. They were staying with low-level jobs. They weren't even proper houses. They couldn't bring their families. And they were sitting ducks because nobody wanted them. Even while living in Kashmir, none of them had dared go back to their village to even look at their home. Now, the point that I would try to make is, firstly, the government of India and organizations, citizens organizations, must reach out and enable Kashmiri Hindus who have been scattered to fill in the forms, secure domicile certificates. Secondly, the Sainik colonies that the government, that the BJP at one time talked about, are an absolute must. Apart from a Kashmiri homeland, the Panun Kashmir demand, it becomes very relevant today. But I think settling, having Kashmiri Sainik colonies is very essential, because there has to be a security ring around Kashmiri Hindu settlements. Or if the government has the guts, please let them secure the properties that were looted, destroyed, or vandalized, or taken over forcibly, or people had to sell under distress. Now, the point that I'm trying to make is just 3 quick points. If the government is serious, and if the rest of India is serious, firstly, those who were responsible for the forced exodus, for the genocide of Kashmiri Hindus have to be punished through fast-track trials. I want to see several of them hanged, including some of the mainstream politicians who were complicit in it. Today, not a single FIR against anyone who did that. And even recently, when Yasin Malik had some cases revived, it was for the abduction of Rubaiya Saeed. She could well say, oh, main to apni marzi se gayi thi. Not for murder, not for killing of higher officers, not for many other crimes he committed, but for abduction of Rubaiya Saeed, which could well be actually a stage drama. I mean, you don't know what they might end up doing. Now, following steps. If the government of India is serious, all those, firstly, this democracy drama needs to be done away with. I don't know why the government is so obsessed with restoring what they call democracy. If Kashmiri Muslims had been interested in democracy, then NC, PDP, they wouldn't be rigging elections from day one. Did they allow democracy to function? Did Sheikh Abdullah want democracy? No. He rigged elections from day one. Secondly, those who don't, today DDC has all those elected representatives, Government of India has given them new lease of life. The same old rogues are back in power. Thousands of crores at their disposal. And all this in the name of restoring democracy. If we are serious, let's do three things. Number one, anyone, whether leader or Kashmiri, who says Hindus don't have the right to return or is not willing to commit in writing that Indians from anywhere in India can, just as Kashmiris can go anywhere in India, take a job, buy properties, the rest of us have to have that right. If they say no, then let their properties be confiscated in the rest of India. They cannot be allowed to be setting up businesses all over. Many of them are sleeper cells, actually, terror cells. Secondly, all these students who are actually, who spread out with Government of India scholarships and then come and shout slogans in the heart of Delhi, in JNU, Bharat Tere Tukde Honge, Inshallah, Inshallah. Any student who thinks they do not belong to India, that they are not part of this entire nation, then sorry, they better go back and fight for Azadi in the valley. There should be no place for them in the rest of India. We are actually pampering them. We are rewarding them with special benefits, with special schemes. They come, and the Shaila Rasheeds of Kashmir, they spread all over the country. We can't allow that. The least they owe this country is a written commitment, and it should be put on the website. All those who wish to avail of the rights of Indian citizens, which they do very happily, they come claim jobs, they come claim scholarships, they come claim the right to set up businesses. They have to give in writing, and it should be on a website, that they support the right of Indians from anywhere in the country to go and live there. Otherwise, confiscate their properties. They will understand the meaning of the value of the citizenship of this country only when they are made to pay for it. They're not being made to pay. They are being rewarded endlessly. Even now, the jobs that are being advertised, majority of them, 90% are going to Kashmiri Muslims. And by design. I mean, you're rewarding them again and again, the thousands of crores of development funds that are going to go to these DDCs. Same old roads. It's not even as if those who have come into power represent a politics very different from PDP, NC, or even the Congress party, which became like a wagging tail of these two parties and the Hurriyat. So we have to take a determined stand, punish those who were guilty, and there has to be for this thing. And somebody just mentioned, no law against genocide, no law against hate crimes. They've done it all and they're getting away with it. And most of us didn't even know. See, their mission is not democracy. Their mission is Ghazwa-e-Hind. They've been executing it. Do you have the guts? Does the government have guts to say mission Ghazwa-e-Hind will be combated with force? And that includes change in the demographic composition, reverse change in the demographic composition of J&K. And it's only when Muslims don't have a brute majority in J&K that Kashmiri Hindus can hope to go reclaim their right to be there. And it better be done fast and with determination. Enough of this goody dhimmi talk about how good they are. Most of them realize that Kashmiri Pandits were so valuable. They're very good at the art of deception.
You think that when political leaders welcome the return of Kashmiri Pandits, people like Farooq Abdullah have said that you come back and we are welcoming you with open arms. You're saying that
that is just not even a facade worth laughing at. Okay. Did anybody do anything to even protest the murder of Satpal Nischal? How many of them? See, if a scratch happens to one of their own, then the valley explodes. What happened when Satpal Nischal was murdered? How many of them came out on the street to protest or offer protection to his family? Not one. Not even BJP and RSS. Not even a statement from the Prime Minister of India that this is not acceptable. If the Prime Minister of India takes it as business as usual, the Home Minister did not say this is not to be tolerated. And those who are not standing up in an active manner for the protection and the return, active manner. If they are serious, if Abdullah is serious, let Kashmiri properties be returned. Now, what do Kashmiri Hindus go back to? Their homes are gone. And the kind of colonies that were built during PDP regime was such a shame. They were sitting ducks. They were not really meant to resettle them. They were actually the worst kind of tokenism that reminded them that they don't belong here. And they were forever endangered, and they didn't have proper homes. So that return them their homes, return them. The government of India should take over those properties. They've been illegally acquired. If the government of India has got to do that,
doing it in a piecemeal fashion, in a step-by-step fashion, with the revocation of Article 370, you have schemes which have been rolled out, the Prime Minister's schemes, and it will take some time to inspire that confidence. But Dr. where do you stand? Should there be complete integration? Is that possible? Or should there be colonies? Because that also has been flagged off as possible ghettoization by many. So I think your mic is muted. If you could please unmute it. Dr. Ved.
No, am I audible?
You are now, sir.
As things stand today, there continues to be presence of terrorists in the valley, and complete integration of Kashmiri migrants to go back and settle in, let's say, in a village in Shopaiya or Pulwama is not possible. And they will be again targeted as they were targeted in the 90s. I think only secure colonies is possibility of their return, whoever is willing to go and settle there. But certain steps government have taken in piecemeal. I would elaborate later on. There is actually a requirement of a long-term government plan I find it lacking in last 3 decades. Like there is no consistent policy to handle the ISI plan, what my other co-panelists were mentioning. Basically, I recall in late 90s, when I was interrogating a terrorist, he very plainly mentioned, which I think is the thinking in the ISI of that time in the early 90s, that हमने तो कश्मीर ले लिया, अब हमारी नजर पूरे हिंदुस्तान पे है. तो गज़वे हिंद is actually their plan, and there is need for a long-term policy to counter this. And the steps like abrogation of Article 370 and 35A, these are very welcome steps, and it should have been taken much earlier, and government is moving in right direction. But I think these steps will take time to show results on the ground. Slowly, things are improving. Security situation will take some time to become completely normal, to the extent that Kashmiri Pandits can go and live in the way they were earlier living. But again, the question: many of their houses have been sold. Many of their properties have been sold. So many of their temples are deserted. There are no pujaris in those temples. In fact, some of them are being manned by the pujaris of the security forces. So it's a complicated situation. We need to have. That's why I will again come back to the point. There is lack of a consistent policy by Government of India, both in terms of handling the problem faced in Kashmir, as well as for the return of the Kashmiri Pandits. I personally feel everything should be done that is possible to instill confidence in the Kashmiri Pandit community for their safe return. While many of the majority Kashmiri Muslims talk of missing Kashmiri Pandits, particularly in the education sector, for their children, but there is a section of Kashmiri majority population which have a vested interest of in the present situation, because they have taken over the properties, they have encroached upon many of the orchards and houses and properties of the Kashmiri Pandit, and some of them, I recall, have been distress sales. Though there was an order from the government to the divisional commissioners and deputy commissioners not to allow distress sales, but I am aware of many of such cases where distress sales have taken place, and many Kashmiri Pandits thinking that their children, once they have gone to rest of India, will not return, and they have disposed of their properties. Now, in such a complicated situation, I think there is a requirement of a long-term plan.
Dr. If I may interrupt you for a second, and for the last 3 decades we've heard this. There needs to be something needs to be done to inspire confidence. Can you tell me 2 things? What is that thing that will inspire confidence? What would make Kashmiri Hindus feel secure enough to return to the valley?
See, one is most important is security of life. That is, unless somebody feels secure, he or she will not go back to valley.
But how can that be ensured? The security situation, says the government, is now better than what it was, at least in the last 2.5 decades.
Yeah.
Can you forget decades of hostility and an institutional memory of what was done simply because you've got more boots on the ground? How does one make an individual feel that you will not be attacked by your neighbor? Because this wasn't an external aggressor. In many cases, it was people in your neighborhood who you broke bread with who turned against you. How do you forget that?
That's right. Absolutely. See, now over the decades, this radicalization has taken place. Now, the neighbor, which was in, let's say, in 60s or 70s, last many decades, the process of radicalization has taken place with as per action planned by the ISI, and you need to at least focus on the new generation for years to come, to bring them back. See, if those children continue to be radicalized, at least we should focus on the present generation and the future generation. Let the new Kashmir, which we are thinking of, today you have come with an education plan for the whole country.
Okay.
I hope it is being put in place in Kashmir. I recall prior to 90, in the schools in Kashmir, there used to be national anthem in the early morning when school assembly used to take place. I don't recall after 90 there is any national anthem being sung anywhere in the local Kashmiri schools. Many of their children are going to madrasas. Is there a plan to handle that? So that is why I'm saying strategically Kashmir is not being handled by Government of India, though certain actions have been taken, but still there is much need to be done. Today, let me mention here, your secretariat, which is seat of power, continues to be more than 90%. It is controlled by one particular community. If you go there, you do not feel it's a composite seat of power. I recall when in the 90s, I think in the middle of 2000, when Bam Bam Bole agitation took place in Jammu, you all recall that. Some of the mainstream politicians of Kashmir tauntingly were mentioning, "Acha, kaun Hindu hai? 2.5 districts." If this is the feeling of mainstream political leaders, they think that only 2.5 districts, that is Kathua, Jammu, and half of Udhampur is Kashmiri Hindu. That is not true. Hindus were scattered all over the Kashmir Valley. Today, Jammu looks more like a city of mosques than city of temples. This is the condition that they have created in Jammu region.
Okay, so these are again some measures that you've spoken of, still seem to be more a long-term project. Madhu Kishore wants to quickly make a point because I must go on
very quickly. Since you were in charge of the police till recently, Mr. Vaidya, would you not agree that Asifa murder case was actually well-planned demographic invasion conspiracy? That it was those who are in jail are actually not the guilty, that she's actually been killed by her very own, and a fake narrative peddled. What did the police, JNK police did? And even today, the government is opposing death penalty. का जो court ने कहा death penalty नहीं, life imprisonment. They are innocents who've been. And Asifa murder case, I've actually written a whole book which will be published soon. It can be very well demonstrated that it was part of a whole conspiracy to do what they'd already done in Rajur and Puch. What did you do, sir? You were in charge at that time. You implicated innocents and you allowed the real guilty to get away.
Padmaja, I address to you rather than Madam. She has her own views, and as Director General Police, I have my own views. When it comes to crime, I do not see in terms of community. The court has already pronounced judgment in that case and convicted those people. Let higher courts take view. I think my view or Madam Madhu Kishwar's view will not matter. If she has anything to say, let her say in the court. Ultimately, in the Indian system, the judiciary has to take a call in that. Yes, political encashment was made by that. And I would not like to name the politician, but yes, they tried to encash it. And obviously, in India, certain political parties, they try to encash, they take advantage of such criminal incidents and try to encash Muslim votes in Jammu region, which was not my job as a police officer. We have done what was right, and the courts will take the call for it.
Yes, and I think can we please stick to the main point of discussion here about the rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits and talking about how we can instill confidence in them. General Gurmeet Singh, if you could come in on that. How does one make an individual feel safe enough to come back to a state where they have lost their love?
I must compliment you for this question. In fact, this is the real issue. How do we generate confidence? In fact, at times I think why did the Israelis go back to Israel? Why did the Jews go back to Israel? They had the love for the land. They all collectively decided. For them, it's a matter of survival. For them, it was a matter of the conviction. See, one thing is there that there have got to be a political will that we will provide the security environment to them. In fact, I would say it is the responsibility of the center, it is the responsibility of the security forces, it's the responsibility of the police to categorically say that we'll provide the environment of security there. In fact, it is important that we have a clear political will, we have a clear narrative. I would go to the extent of saying there is a need of an act of parliament to say that Kashmiri Pandits will return and the nation will ensure that they will return. In fact, I would say the idea of one India, integrated India, is absolutely a rhetoric until unless the Kashmiri Pandits return to their roots and the land. When the matter is land and the roots, it is a sub-chapter of sovereignty and territorial integrity. I personally feel all of us, we are responsible. In fact, if I count that who is responsible to ensure that we create environment for their return and rehabilitation, I would say even the society there in Kashmir is responsible. In fact, they have to welcome the quality and the quantum of what they say and what they do to welcome the Kashmiri Pandit is important. And it must come from the Kashmiri Muslims themselves. And apart from that, the government, security forces, police, and the so-called leadership there in that area has got to pronounce it and pronounce it from the rooftop. Otherwise, it will not happen. In fact, it is a sad that 31 years have gone by and still the Kashmiri Pandits have not gone back to the root. I think that is a very painful aspect of it. I would say Kashmir is incomplete without Kashmiri Pandits. And whatever the problem there is in Kashmir is because of the void of the Kashmiri Pandits in that area. So therefore, it is important not only for the Kashmiri society there, but for the governance, administration, the very idea of one India that they must return. I am of this belief that there is a requirement of firstly the de-radicalization of the locals who have got affected because of what Pakistan did. They went through a proper process of radicalization. So therefore, we got to have a proper process of and action of de-radicalization. And I would say that there is a requirement of social re-engineering of the society there. And that cannot be done until the Kashmiri Pandits go back to that area. Also, it is important on the Kashmiri Pandits themselves.
Aren't these really long-term projects? When you speak about de-radicalization, when you see that the education system needs to be changed in such a way that there is no otherization of the Kashmiri Hindus, this will take decades, if not centuries. So will the Pandits, I mean, the generation that moved away from the valley will unfortunately be long gone by then. Will their children, their grandchildren even want to go back to Kashmir because they will not have that kind of emotional connect?
Ma'am, that's an excellent point. I would say these are processes. It will take time. But what will not take time is the decision. What will not take time is the national will. What will not take the time is the political will. What will not take the time is the narrative. And actually, we got to do it with a military mission mode. Do we have a mission to send them back? Do you see it in the environment? In fact, we got to state it. We got to put it absolutely lucidly that we have decided. And let me tell you one thing, Padmaji. One thing is definite, that the time, opportunity, and environment is now. This is the moment we can do it. If we can't do it now, we'll never be able to do it. And another aspect, let's not look for a perfect normal. There is nothing known as perfect normal of environment. I think the environment which is existing now is the time that we should take. There are two aspects. One is that the Kashmiri Pandits have got to return, and the second, they got to be rehabilitated. The responsibility of the Kashmiri Pandits themselves, their youth, entrepreneur, youth amongst the Kashmiri, I think they got to take the step to go there. If the Jews decided to go back to Israel, nobody could stop them. And if today the Kashmiri Pandit youth and the Kashmiri Pandit decide to go, nobody can stop them. These methods of composite cloning and other aspects are the methodology, but behind that there is a requirement of a passion, a burning passion. In fact, I would
Okay.
say one thing.
We get Alok Bansalji to answer to that. Is there a real political will in the government and the country at present, or is this more platitudes and lip service that we hear very frequently? And mostly around this time when we remember the exodus of Kashmiri Hindus.
I don't think so. There should be any doubt that as far as the government is concerned, it's committed to the rehabilitation. I think even the society at large has been doing it. There are a large number of NGOs which are working towards it. But yes, ideal circumstances for their return have not been created. But let me make it very clear that ideal circumstances will never be created. 100% ideal circumstance will never exist. The Jews, remember, for centuries they remained away, but every year they would meet next year in Jerusalem. Now, do we have that sort of an intent? That is what is important. That is equally important. I never said that most of the Muslims are willing to welcome you and back into the valley, but I said there is a feeling that a certain section of the Kashmiri Pandit community is not very keen to go back also. And this is happening as the people who migrated are aging and their children are well settled outside Jammu and Kashmir, that many of them do not wish to go back. There is definitely an intent, and I think steps are being taken. And that's where I was saying that in one go, a person going back to his home is not feasible. So we need to create a transit situation somewhere in Kashmir Valley where they go, stay and feel secure and get the feel of the place and then move to their
Is that true, Pandit?
Padmaja, thank you for calling me in.
Thanks for waiting. Sorry, this has been taking time.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I was listening to the views of the esteemed panelists, and it's very interesting to know from the horse's mouth, as Dr. Vaid mentioned and Captain Alok Bansal was talking about. Frankly, I think there's no time to mince words anymore. Let me agree with General Gurmeet Singh. Our government doesn't find Kashmiri Hindus a factor anymore in its priorities as an issue to be dealt with, as something to address at all. We don't count for anything. We are not a factor at all. We are at best an irritant. And since they have lived long with this irritant, they are happy to live even longer because they've gotten used to it. And it is only during the month of January every year that this issue crops up and webinars happen and protests happen and people bear their wounds. And then all and sundry are called upon to dwell on it again, express their opinions, and we are done with it by the end of the month and things move on. We are not a factor, and that is the reason, Vaid Saab, there is no policy, there is no consistency, there is no proposal, there is no plan. Because had we been a priority, there would have been a strategy. Since we are not a priority, we are not a factor, there is a piecemeal approach. And yes, there is a piecemeal approach. And even in that piecemeal approach, what stands out is stark ignorance about what happened to us, what happens on the ground, what is needed to be done. There is unwillingness even to learn, to connect with the community. There is a certain kind of arrogance that we know what needs to be done. We know what is the solution. We know what will work. I mean, this is hugely remarkable that people come with such cocksurety about what will work. If you were to ask them, who's told you this? Is there an empirical evidence? Have you consulted people? What makes you say that this will work? Where is this cockeyed surety coming from? Have you ever lived there? You would know that there is this half-baked arrogance which speaks in terms of what will happen, how things will happen, and what needs to be done. And the reason why this is happening is because there is an underlying dishonesty, which is what makes this government untrustworthy. And while I might find this government the best of the government so far, but it is still continuing with the same old policy. It doesn't want to change things on ground. It would like to wear change on its sleeve as an agenda, but it is primarily at the core a status quoist government. It doesn't want to alter things on ground in Kashmir. I'll give you examples. In the July month of last year, they lost in Bandipur the district president of their party. His name was Wasim Bari. He was shot dead with his father and brother sitting in his house. The house was less than 90 yards from the nearest police station. He apparently even had about a dozen odd SPOs guarding him. On that day, they were mysteriously missing. Anyway, even if we come to expect these accidents as the hazard of living in the valley, and we say, okay, there are too many guns on loose and they can find an opportunity and they can strike at will, and this has come to be expected, this has, you shouldn't be surprised, fine, all right, done. But what beats reason is, this is a union territory, there is a lieutenant governor. These three hapless people can't find a grave in their local graveyard. Now, they can't find a Maulvi to do their last rites. So a PSO is called for janaze, for namaz-e-janaza, and a JCB is called to bury them in their orchard. This is no accident. This is about not asserting authority for a decent ritual of those who died because they were part of your party, a ruling party. You don't want to ruffle feathers. You want to quietly go along the flow. If your workers cannot sleep at home, if 400 of them have to be given secured camps to sleep in overnight because they feel threatened, and mind you, these are Muslims in the valley and they are part of a ruling party. They can't sleep at home. And we are told there'll never be an ideal situation to return. So you will have to make up your mind and return and assert your rights. Who are you delivering these homilies to? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? What are you talking about? This government has shirked its responsibility as far as KPs are concerned because we are not a factor. We are used for victim bashing. We are used for shifting the blame. We are almost told in as many words that you had it coming when you tell us, oh, you were privileged. Oh, you were well-heeled. You were the elite. You were the upper crust of the society. What he's trying to tell you is, therefore, you were the right targets. Don't blame anyone else. It is coming out of not just ignorance. Let me tell you, Padmaja, and I'm saying this with all sincerity. We have been socially profiled as a community, and here the comparisons with Jews is absolutely correct. Like Jews were socially profiled the enemies of the Jews were open enemies and the friends were also somewhere complicit. There is a social profiling of Kashmiri Pandits as those who were elite, as those who were arrogant, as those who perhaps were part of the exploitative class, as those who had disproportionate clout of political power, those who had arrogated to themselves resources, and hence there had to be a certain amount of right sizing. And those who are very opinionated, those who are really divided, splintered, ambitious, and therefore their lot is well deserved. This runs into all the echelons. Even those who today decide policy for us, unfortunately, carry this prejudice. I know of a member parliament from Jammu and Kashmir who in the private conversations has proffered this suggestion that, oh, look at their weddings. Look at how much money they spend in the banquet halls. Why are you bothered about even succor to them in exile? Stop all this. Because they see a few who have, through their sheer dint of effort, labor, entrepreneurship, done well in life, they are held up as an example which should be generalized across community. And therefore, people rotting in Jagti should be deprived. They forget that not a single naya paisa compensation has been given to anyone in the last 30 years for the loss of property or for the loss of life. Frankly, Padmaja, after all these years of waiting, I have serious doubts about the intent of my state. It is complicit in our situation. It is party to our misfortune. Otherwise, there is no reason why even a single FIR on heinous crimes committed against us has not been prosecuted to its conclusion. No sentencing, no conviction. Yasin Maliks and Pita Karates have given unwritten clemency for all their heinous crimes. They are treated with kid gloves. Petty crimes are slapped against them for prosecution, not the crime of genocide. My country, my state, my system is running scared of even admitting to the fact that we suffered a genocide.
Can I get Alok Bansal to respond to that?
Acknowledge it. In fact, Home Minister said to a delegation of Kashmiri Pandits, so what do you want to do? Write genocide on your forehead before you go to the valley. That's how you mock. You don't want
to respond to that?
You don't want to acknowledge genocide. You don't want to retrieve our properties. And you want us to make up our minds, because there will never be an ideal situation when your own office bearers are camped because they can't sleep at home and they are Muslims of the valley. They can't find a...
I think your mic has been muted. Your mic has been muted, Sushil Pandit.
Sorry.
Yes, it's back on. Can I just get Alokji to respond to that? There is a feeling that this is almost like a denial of the exodus on the lines of the Holocaust denial. While there may be intent, but it's not followed up with strong enough action.
No, there is an intent. As I said, I have no doubts as far as the country and the society is concerned that there is an intent that Kashmiri Pandits should be rehabilitated and resettled. Well, there may be certain absence of mechanisms on ground level that FIRs have not been registered, but there are a lot of steps which have been taken. I think all the sales that have been done at a particular time have been actually declared null and void. If you were forced to sell property, you can actually go back and say that I was actually pressurized to sell this property, and the property will be restituted to that. That also law has been brought in. There have been actually the people whose property have been usurped. I think government is making efforts to get them back. But as I said, all these administrative mechanisms, bureaucracies take time. But the intent is there. I do not agree that there is no intent on the part of the government that Kashmiri Pandits should go back and resettle. That is my belief. I am not part of the government. But what I see in my numerous visits to Kashmir is that there is an intent. I have had the occasion to interact with certain people coming in the Jammu and Kashmir administration as well. And I think there is an intent. There are certain actions which have been taken to facilitate that. It may be a little slow, but it is definitely there. And I think the attempt is being made to do that.
Dr. Ramesh Raina, would you agree with that? Dr. Raina, are you there?
Padmaja, may I come in for a moment here?
All right. Yes, please go on.
The law that was mentioned here is not about restituting the properties in distress sale. That's wrong. There was a law passed that hereafter, a Kashmiri Pandit selling a property will have to certify that he is not selling it in distress to the government of India before it is formalized. In fact, that made life even more miserable for Kashmiri Pandits, because those who were in dire need of money could not even, sell their property in distress. That created even bigger hurdle, because there is absolutely no money. They're living a life of penury. They don't have money to spend for even the treatment of their old parents or education of their children or for any other emergency. And those properties that have been encroached upon, the state says, come, fight a case. There is a criminal justice system. There is a legal system. There is encroachment on your property. Come, sit in Kashmir Valley and fight an expensive litigation to get rid of that encroachment. This is, I'm afraid, pretensions won't work. Real work on ground has to show for itself, and there isn't any. And victim blaming is rampant because there is a prejudice, there is a social profiling, there is hatred, visceral hatred for Kashmiri Pandits, I tell you. This stems from a deep-seated prejudice. When we were in Kashmir Valley, let me tell you, Kashmir itself was a butt of hatred because Kashmir meant the Kashmiri Muslims led by Sheikh Abdullah, and they deprived all other regions of all resources. So all Kashmiris were Kashmiris. There was no distinction between a Hindu Kashmiri and a Muslim Kashmiri. And we felt that when we had to leave the valley, we were called Kashmiris. It took some time for the people in Jammu to figure out that no, we were Kashmiri Hindus and we were pushed out. While in Kashmir Valley, the share which was coming to Kashmir was never shared with us. We had to go out for education and jobs out of the valley. It was all arrogated to Kashmiri Muslims. But because we were Kashmiris, we were sharing the blame. When we came out, we were treated as Kashmiris to start with. Then there is this huge notion that because we were white collar most of the time, because out of sheer dint, hard work, perseverance, we rose in bureaucracy. We were seen as disproportionate in our political clout, in our positions in bureaucracy, academia, media, wherever. That was, your success is held against you as a crime. Can you imagine?
So the privilege was held against you.
That too of a few. The generalization is incredible.
So let me ask you this. Let me get in. Is Dr. Ramesh Raina here with us now?
Yes. Thank you, Padmaja, for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Yes.
You see, whatever the distinguished panelists have said, there's no reason for me to disagree with them because all this has been happening and this will continue. But we need to understand a few things. When we were in Kashmir, there were two types of citizenries. One was a Kashmiri Muslim, which was treated as a Kashmiri, and Kashmiri Pandit was always treated as a Markaz ka aadmi, ye Hindustan ka aadmi hai. And when the initial phase of militancy started there, anything that was India had to be thrown out of that. And Kashmiri Pandits already being labeled as Markaz ka aadmi, Life Insurance Corporation of India, State Bank of India, so on and so forth. And this anti-India sweep took place primarily, the focus being to purge Kashmir of its minorities. All this, when we conceptualize all these things, when we talk about all these things, when we create a narrative about all these things, we also need to understand the basic thing is that it was not overnight. It didn't happen overnight, because right from 1947 till 1990, there were plenty of episodes which coalesced together to give rise to a situation of throwing out Kashmiri Pandits. For example, there was a Delhi agreement in 1952 between Sheikh Abdullah and Jawaharlal Nehru. For example, there was Beg Parthasarthi Accord of 1975 between Madam Gandhi and Beg Sahab. Then there was another Rajiv Farooq Accord in 1986. What is the cumulative impact of these accords? The cumulative impact of these accords was to get Kashmiri Muslim on board, to make him realize, to keep him somehow happy. But what message did it carry? The message was that there was a negative secularism which was anti-Kashmiri Pandit in its orientation and pro-Muslim in its orientation. That is what we cultivated all these years. Therefore, when we talk of rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits, we have to take many things together. It's not a mere word, Kashmiri Pandits rehabilitation, but the sum total of the exodus of all these 30 years, one, and most important thing is that we are trying to remake a home after displacement. So that thing, one very important aspect is there to understand us. The psyche, the political site of the government, the political site of the establishment for all these 73 years has been responding to a narrative built by Muslims of Kashmir. And it has a Muslim orientation. And that Muslim orientation means it is full of victimhood. It's full of atrocity narrative. And this atrocity narrative has been very heavy on Kashmiri Pandits, as Mr. Pandit very rightly and elucidated the whole thing. I don't need to go into the details of that victimhood narrative, but that victimhood narrative is very heavy on the rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits, because it is always seen as injurious to Kashmiri Muslims, because as he rightly said, that we are no factor in the thinking of the government. Therefore, we have lost that factorial importance, whatever was there before 1990. But if we talk of rehabilitation for Kashmiri Pandits, we need to take government perspective. We have to take it outside our thinking domain. How do we think in terms of rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits is that Kashmir is a core constituency of Kashmiri Pandits. How do I define the core constituency of Kashmiri Pandits? How do I define it? The definition is that before partition, before 1947 partition, when a Hindu from Pakistan, Hindu from Lahore, Hindu from Rawalpindi, Hindu from Sindh used to visit Delhi, he used to say, "Asi Pind ke Hindu hai, asi Sindh ke Hindu hai," because Sindh and Rawalpindi was their core constituency. Immediately after partition, they got mingled with the mainstream of the country. Therefore, they lost their core constituency. Now, they are Hindus of Delhi, they are Hindus of Rajasthan. So, if we at any given point of time, we say that Kashmir is lost for us, that means we are losing our core constituency. Therefore, Kashmir as a core constituency means that two things have to be done. That is precursor to our rehabilitation. One is that you need to create a legitimate minority space in the Valley of Kashmir. As of now, there is no legitimate space for minorities. It is a monotheistic society. Islam is prevalent here. And another thing, if at all we think that we need to create a minority space, with that has to come political empowerment of Kashmiri Pandits. And that political empowerment of Kashmiri Pandits has to come from the mainstream political parties of the place. Because you have to see the profile of political parties of Kashmir. For example, National Conference. What is the presence of minorities there? Which Kashmiri Pandit do you find on an important position in National Conference? Then you come to PDP. They are the mainstream Kashmiri organizations. Which Kashmiri Pandit do you find there holding important posts? Or, for that matter, any for that matter, the recent inclusion into the mainstream parties is Apni Party. Who is an important office bearer of that organization?
I'm really sorry to cut in, but
when we talk of political
we're running
empowerment,
very, very short of time. But I think the larger point that has been made, that the integration cannot stop at homilies where you say that Kashmir is integrated with the rest of India. It has to be at every level for the Kashmiri Hindu community as well, bureaucratic, administrative, political, and most importantly, create a safe space for them to return. I'm really sorry.
Just a few words more.
Yes,
Just a few words more. Just a few words more. You see, two very important things are there. For example, on the pretext of public utility services, our lands have been taken by the government agencies. Not only that, see the role of bureaucracy. See, very recently, Gandhi Memorial College, a minority institution, was taken over by the government. See, National High School was taken by the government. The management of Devi High School, Ranawari, is being taken by Muslims of that place. When I talk in terms of creating a legitimate minority space, that means you have to take few steps first and not the last step first. The few step first would mean, as I said, that precursor to return is that you need to create an environment, you need to address to the security concerns and threat perception of Kashmiri Pandits. And security and threat perception of Kashmiri Pandits does not mean that we just restore you physically there. We need to link into psychological memory.
I'm really I apologize for interrupting, but we're completely out of time. But thank you very much for the very specific points that have been raised by some of our speakers. It's not enough to pay lip service and say we need a safe space. It would perhaps help to see a few of the murderers of Kashmiri Hindus hanging first. Thanks very much, all gentlemen, and Madhu Kishwar for having joined us on this session.
Thank you, everybody, for this enlightening words. It was a very insightful session.